Officer Derek Sullivan's boots crunched against the spotless sidewalk of Brookhaven's wealthiest block. He spotted the black man in a tailored suit, and his face twisted with contempt. "What the hell you think you're doing here, boy?" Sullivan's voice cracked through the quiet morning like a whip. The man turned. "Officer, I'd watch your mouth." Sullivan yanked the man's wrist, twisting it to inspect his watch. "This Rolex stolen. You breaking into these homes?" He shoved him backward. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "Now, officer, please." Sullivan slammed him against a luxury car, the metallic thud echoing. "I said turn around, you piece of trash. You don't belong here." The man's suit wrinkled against the hood, his calm voice holding back anger. "I live in this house." Sullivan laughed harshly. "Sure you do. And I'm Barack damn Obama." Have you ever seen such raw humiliation aimed at someone just for existing? Terrence Washington felt the cold metal of his BMW against his chest. 23 years of federal service, and he was treated like a thief on his own property. ID now. Sullivan's breath reeked of stale coffee and disdain. Terrence reached slowly for his wallet, every movement measured. One wrong move could end it all. His fingers closed around the Italian leather wallet, a gift from his wife Keisha after his last promotion. Sullivan snatched it, rifling through like it held contraband. "Terrence Washington," he sneered. "What kind of fake name is that?" "It's my name, officer." Sullivan held up the Federal Credit Union Platinum card, suspicion in his eyes. "Where'd you steal this from?" "It's government issued." Across the street, Mrs. Carter's live stream was exploding. Notifications pinged as viewers piled in. She whispered to the camera, "This is disgusting. He lives here. I've seen him every morning for 3 years." The comments raged. "Call the FBI. This isn't 1955. Sue them blind, but darker voices chimed in. "He looks shady. Probably scoping houses. People like him don't belong here." Sullivan's radio buzzed. "Unit 47 requesting backup on Maple Drive." "Copy, 47. Unit 23 en route." Terrence's phone buzzed. The screen read, "Director Jensen, FBI." He declined, checking his Omega Seamaster. Sullivan missed the other detail, the small eagle pin on his lapel catching the sun. "You got a permit for this neighborhood, boy?" Sullivan shoved the wallet at him. "Rich folks pay good money to keep your kind out." "Officer Sullivan." Terrence read his badge aloud. "I'm asking you to step back." "You'll ask me." Sullivan's hand slid to his taser. "You giving me orders?" The sound of another patrol car tightened Terrence's jaw. His civil rights training predicted this. Multiple cops, suburban setting, only social media as witness. Officer Janet Mills stepped from the cruiser, sizing up quickly. Sullivan waved her over, relieved. "Suspicious subject, claims he lives in the Morrison house." Mills looked at the towering colonial behind them, worth millions, then back at Terrence. Her face said it all. "Do you have documentation proving residence?" Her tone was professional but sharp. Terrence reached into his jacket. Both officers tensed, hands hovering near weapons. He pulled out a set of keys, the BMW fob gleaming. "House keys, car keys, mailbox." Sullivan snatched them. "Could have copied. Could have stolen." Mrs. Carter called out, "Officers, he's lived here 3 years. His name's on the mailbox." "Ma'am, step back," Mills ordered. "We're conducting an investigation." "Into what?" Carter shot back. "A man standing in his own driveway." Terrence's phone buzzed again. Same caller, same decline, but this time he smiled faintly. Sullivan was too busy checking keys to notice. "What's funny, boy?" Sullivan barked louder. "Think this is a joke?" "No, officer. I think this is exactly what I expected." The words hit wrong. "Expected? You planning this?" Neighbors trickled out. The Hendersons paused next door, Mrs. Patterson with her poodle. The Wilson twins slowed their jog. Some looked worried, others smug like they'd waited for this. Then Karen Mitchell appeared, HOA badge shining on her tracksuit. She'd never welcomed Terrence here. "Officers," she said with authority, "we've had break-ins lately. Better safe than sorry." Mills nodded. "See? The community's concerned." Terrence's voice stayed quiet. "I've lived here since 2022. Never heard of you." "Because you don't belong," Karen snapped. "This neighborhood has standards." The live stream was now viral, thousands watching. Local reporters were on their way. Hashtags trended. Brookhaven profiling, justice for Terrence. black tails. But Terence wasn't watching social media. He was watching his Omega countdown. The encrypted signal blinked once, twice. His contact was growing impatient. Sullivan leaned in close. "You know what? I think you're coming downtown with me." "Let the detectives handle this." "On what charge?" "Trespassing, public disturbance, failure to follow lawful orders." Terence locked eyes with Sullivan. "Officer, I strongly suggest you wait." "Wait for what, smart guy?" "You'll see." The handcuffs clicked tight. Steel bit into Terence's wrists as Sullivan shoved him against the patrol car. The fine fabric of his suit scraped across the rough metal, but his expression stayed eerily calm. "You have the right to remain silent," Sullivan began, savoring every word. "Officer Sullivan," Terence cut into the Miranda warning. "Badge number 4471. Remember that number." Sullivan froze mid-sentence. "What did you just say?" "Your badge number. 4471. I want you to remember it." Something in Terence's tone rattled Sullivan's confidence before fury returned. "You threatening me, boy? I'm only asking you to remember your badge number." Another cruiser arrived. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped out, his 15 years of experience clear in the way he scanned the scene. Handcuffed black man, 2 officers, restless crowd, phones recording. "What's the situation?" Rodriguez asked with controlled authority. "Trespassing suspect," Mills reported. "Claims he lives in the Morrison house." Rodriguez looked at the Grand Colonial, then back at Terence's expensive suit. Something felt off, but protocol demanded procedure. "Any ID?" Sullivan held up the wallet. "Says Terence Washington. Probably fake. Credit union card, too." Rodriguez studied it longer than Sullivan had. "These are tough to fake." "Probably stolen," Karen Mitchell cut in, pushing forward. "I'm the HOA coordinator. I know who belongs here." Across the street, Mrs. Carter's live feed was exploding. 8,000 viewers and climbing fast. The comments were chaos. "This is outrageous. Where are the civil rights lawyers?" "Call the FBI. Cops like this should be fired." But others pushed back. "Good police work. Protect the neighborhood. He doesn't belong." News crews were already rolling out. Dana Williams from Channel 7 was minutes away, with more outlets following. Rodriguez kept his focus on Terence. The man's composure was different. Not nervous guilt, not angry protest. Something else. "Mr. Washington, can you prove residence?" "The keys your officer took open my house, my car, and my mailbox," Terence answered evenly. "Mrs. Carter can confirm I've lived here for 3 years." "Keys can be copied," Sullivan snapped. "Cars can be stolen." Rodriguez wasn't convinced, but the crowd was swelling. The Hendersons were openly filming. Mrs. Patterson had called her husband. The Wilson twins stopped jogging completely. "Look," Rodriguez said, trying to calm the tension. "Let's just verify the address." "No," Sullivan pushed forward. "I'm not playing games. He's trespassing, uncooperative, and threatening me." "What threats?" Rodriguez asked. "Told me to remember my badge number." "That's intimidation." Terence's phone rang again. The caller ID glowed for all to see. Director Jensen, FBI. Sullivan snatched the phone. "What's this? Drug dealer? Parole officer?" He answered mockingly. "Hello, this is Officer Sullivan. Your boy Terence is under arrest." The voice on the other end was sharp, commanding. "Excuse me?" "I said your buddy's under arrest. Want to post bail? Call the station." "Officer, this is FBI Director Jensen. I need to speak with Agent Washington immediately." Sullivan's smirk faltered. "FBI? Yeah, right. And I'm the president." Rodriguez stepped in fast. "Sullivan, hang up now." But Sullivan doubled down. "Listen, whoever you are. This is police business. He's going downtown." "Agent Washington is a federal officer," the voice barked. "Release him at once." Sullivan laughed harshly. "This guy's a criminal." The line went dead. Silence hung heavy. Rodriguez stared at Sullivan, whose face had gone pale. Mills glanced between them, uncertainty creeping in. "What if that was real?" She whispered. "It wasn't," Sullivan shot back, but his tone was weak. "It's a setup." Mrs. Carter's live stream hit 15,000 viewers. Comments flew too fast to read. 3 news vans were visible down the street. Terence stood perfectly still, eyes on his watch. The small display lit up with an encrypted alert. "Federal response authorized. Officers," Terence said quietly, his voice carrying undeniable authority. I'm giving you one last chance to de-escalate this situation. Shut up, Sullivan barked, but his confidence was gone. Karen Mitchell marched forward. Officers, I don't care who he claims to be. This is a private community. We have rules. From across the street, Mrs. Carter shouted, still filming. This isn't a private community, Karen. And he pays more property taxes than you. Than you do, the crowd murmured. More neighbors appeared, some supportive, others doubtful, all with phones raised. Rodriguez was sweating. 15 years on the job told him this was spiraling fast. The calmness, the federal credit card, the phone calls, too many warning signs. Sullivan, maybe we should... No. Sullivan's voice cracked. I'm not backing down to some... He stopped himself, but the word lingered. Terrence slowly turned his head toward him. Somewhat, officer. The crowd went silent. Even the live stream froze. You know what you were about to say, Terrence continued, voice calm and cutting. Say it. Sullivan's jaw moved, but nothing came. The phone rang again. Terrence looked Sullivan in the eye. I think you should answer that. Rodriguez reached for the phone, but Sullivan snatched it. No, I'll handle this, he answered with forced bravado. Sullivan here. Officer Sullivan, this is FBI Director Jensen. Release Agent Washington immediately. I don't care who you think you are. Badge number 4471, Officer Derek Sullivan, Brookhaven Police. 12 years on duty. 17 complaints filed in the past 2 years, 89% involving people of color. Sullivan's face drained. Rodriguez leaned in, trying to hear. You have exactly 60 seconds to remove those handcuffs, Jensen's voice continued. Or I am dispatching federal agents to your location. The line cut. Sullivan stared at the phone, his hand trembling. Federal agents? Mills whispered. Rodriguez already grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12, patch me to Chief Morrison. But it was too late. Black SUVs were visible, speeding down Maple Drive. Terrence finally smiled. The vehicles moved like sharks slicing calm water. 3 of them, tinted windows, federal plates, perfect formation. They stopped at the end of the street. Sullivan's throat went dry. Those aren't federal agents, Rodriguez finished grimly. His radio squawked with confusion. Chief Morrison en route, but the feds are here first. Terrence remained still, cuffs cutting his wrists. But his calm had shifted. Now the quiet focus of a predator ready to strike. Officer Sullivan, Terrence said without turning, look at my lapel pin again. Sullivan's eyes dropped. The small eagle insignia gleamed in daylight, real silver, government issued. What is that? FBI service pin, 23 years. The words landed heavy. Mills stepped back. Rodriguez muttered a prayer. From the lead SUV, a tall black woman stepped out, FBI Director Sarah Jensen. Her stride radiated authority. Her suit flawless, her face like stone. Mrs. Carter's live stream exploded, 22,000 viewers and rising. Comments flooded. Oh my God, he's FBI. These cops are finished. Lawsuit incoming. Blacktail Stories must cover this. Behind Jensen, 6 more agents emerged, earpieces in, moving as one. Karen Mitchell began backing away, her HOA badge suddenly meaningless. Agent Washington. Jensen's voice cut sharp across the street. Status report. Terrence turned as far as the cuffs allowed. Currently detained by Officer Sullivan, badge number 4471, under suspicion of trespassing. On your own property? Apparently. Jensen's eyes swept across Sullivan, Mills, and Rodriguez like a blade. Officer Sullivan, I believe we spoke on the phone. You're really FBI, Sullivan croaked. Director Jensen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She flashed her credentials. Agent Washington is my assistant director for the Civil Rights Division. The crowd reacted like thunder. Assistant director? Civil rights? Rodriguez felt the weight of disaster. Ma'am, we responded to a call about suspicious activity, he said quickly. Suspicious activity? Jensen's voice cut like steel. A federal agent in his own driveway. Mills tried weakly. We didn't know he was... You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood and assumed. Neighbors looked shaken. The Hendersons seemed ashamed. Mrs. Patterson muttered apologies. The Wilson twins streamed live on their own phones. But Jensen's focus was fixed on Sullivan. Officer Sullivan, how many complaints in the last 2 years? I don't know. 17. 89% involving people of color. Want me to read them? Sullivan's face was gray. That's not April 2023, excessive force dismissed. June 2023, racial profiling sustained. August 2023, inappropriate language, verbal warning. September 2023, stop. Rodriguez cut in. Director Jensen, we apologize. We'll release Agent Washington immediately. But Jensen raised a hand. I'm not done. October 2023, unlawful detention settled out of court. November 2023, please, Sullivan whispered. December 2023, harassment dismissed on technicality. January 24. Why are you doing this? Sullivan's voice cracked. Jensen moved closer. Because Agent Washington has been investigating systemic bias in law enforcement for the past 18 months. This encounter is being documented as part of a federal civil rights study. The silence was crushing. Mrs. Carter nearly dropped her phone. She was streaming a federal investigation. Case study? Mills asked. Operation Mirror, Jensen explained. Agent Washington has been tracking bias patterns across 47 police departments nationwide. Brookhaven PD was selected based on complaint ratios and demographic records. Terrence spoke evenly. I chose this neighborhood specifically to test response patterns. Expensive homes, mostly white, history of suspicious person calls. Sullivan stared in disbelief. You set this up? I bought a house and stood in my driveway, Terrence replied calmly. Everything else was your choice. Rodriguez tried to patch the damage. Agent Washington, we regret any— Sergeant Rodriguez, Jensen cut him off. Your department receives $2.3 million annually in federal funding. Civil rights violations can trigger federal review and budget cuts. The word struck Rodriguez like a blow. Federal funding covered equipment, training, nearly half their budget. Jensen signaled an agent who stepped forward with bolt cutters. The cuffs snapped off Terrence's wrists with a sharp click. He rubbed his hands, then adjusted his suit. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a senior federal agent with 23 years behind him. Officer Sullivan. Terrence's voice carried authority. Remember what I said about your badge number? Sullivan nodded faintly. This incident is now part of the federal record. Badge 4471. Officer Derek Sullivan. Unlawful detention of a federal agent. Civil rights violation. Abuse of authority. The live stream surged past 45,000 viewers. Helicopters hovered in the distance. It was no longer a local dispute. It was national news. Channel 7's Dana Williams arrived, too late for the core moment, preparing for aftermath interviews. Karen Mitchell tried to slip away, but Jensen stopped her. Ms. Mitchell, HOA coordinator, you claimed Agent Washington didn't belong here. Karen froze. I was mistaken. You were discriminatory. That's part of the record, too. More agents arrived, along with a mobile command unit. This was now a full federal operation. Rodriguez keyed his radio. All units stand down. Federal operation in progress. Chief Morrison's unmarked car pulled up, his face ashen. Jensen turned to the gathering crowd and media. Ladies and gentlemen, today you've seen systemic bias in action. Officer Sullivan judged based on race and perceived status. She gestured toward Terrence. Agent Washington purchased this property in 2022. He pays $47,000 in annual taxes. He has lived here without incident for 3 years. The crowd murmured. $47,000 in taxes meant a multi-million-dollar home. Today's events will be analyzed as part of a nationwide study. The findings will be presented to Congress next month. Sullivan sat slumped in his patrol car, head in his hands, career in ruins. Mills wished she could vanish. Rodriguez was already calculating the fallout. Terrence glanced at his watch. The encrypted display read, Phase 2 authorized. He met Jensen's eye. She nodded. However, Jensen continued, This is only the beginning of our review of Brookhaven PD. We'll be auditing all arrests, complaints and racial interactions from the past 5 years. Rodriguez nearly buckled. In addition, she said, Agent Washington will directly work with your department on bias training and oversight. Sullivan looked up weakly. He's going to be working with us? Jensen gave a cold smile. Agent Washington will be your new compliance supervisor. You'll see plenty of each other. The irony was brutal. The man Sullivan had humiliated would now oversee his career. Mrs. Carter's live stream kept rolling. her tears falling as comments exploded with outrage and vindication. Chief Morrison arrived fully, saw the agents, the cameras, Sullivan's collapse, and realized his department had been destroyed live. But Jensen wasn't finished. "One more note," she told the crowd. "This entire operation was conducted with departmental cooperation." All eyes turned. Brookhaven PD had volunteered. "Chief Morrison signed the agreement last month," she confirmed. The revelation detonated like a bomb. Rodriguez stared at Morrison, betrayed. Morrison nodded grimly. The department had accepted federal oversight to avoid deeper Justice Department action. Sullivan's world collapsed. His own department had set him up. Terrence stepped forward, facing the cameras. "Stories like this happen every day across America. Black tales, stories that usually go unseen, unrecorded, without justice." His voice carried the weight of 23 years in law enforcement and a lifetime of being judged for his skin. But today the system worked. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it worked. He fixed his eyes on Sullivan. "Officer Sullivan, you have a choice. You can learn from this or repeat it. But you'll never do it again without consequences." Chief Morrison walked toward the Federal Command Center like a man heading to his own execution. His 28 years of service, his pension, his reputation, all balanced on the next exchange. Director Jensen didn't glance up from her tablet. "Chief Morrison, thank you for your cooperation in Operation Mirror." "Director Jensen." Morrison's tone was carefully measured. "I wasn't expecting such a comprehensive response." Agent Washington's detention activated emergency protocols. Jensen's fingers moved across her tablet. "Shall we review the data?" The mobile unit had turned into a courtroom. Agents worked at laptops, analyzing live data. Mrs. Carter's stream continued across the street. 68,000 viewers now watched federal agents dismantle a department's credibility in real time. The comments were ruthless. Brookhaven PD getting exposed. "This is justice. Blacktail stories need to cover this daily. FBI coming for racist cops everywhere." "Operation Mirror has tracked bias for 18 months, Jensen began. "Brookhaven PD ranked in the 97th percentile for racial disparities in arrests." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Those numbers can be misleading." 97%, Jensen cut in, "meaning only 3% of departments nationwide are worse." She turned the screen toward him. Charts filled the display. Arrest rates, complaint ratios, use of force records. The image was damning. "Officer Sullivan is part of a pattern, not an exception. Agent Washington documented 12 similar cases here in 6 months. Rodriguez overheard, still reeling from realizing the department had set them up. 12 incidents. "Officer Mills," Jensen continued, scanning her files. 7 discrimination complaints in 18 months. Officer Torres, 9 complaints. Officer Kim, 4. Officer Patterson, 6. Officer Williams, 11. Each name struck Morrison like a blow. This wasn't random misconduct. It was institutional bias. Agent Sarah Carter, Jensen's legal counsel, stepped forward with more documents. "Chief Morrison, we've also tracked traffic stop disparities. Black drivers are 3.7 times more likely to be searched." 3.7 times, another agent added. "Yet contraband discovery is 42% lower, showing stops based on profiling, not suspicion." Morrison felt trapped. Every number was another nail in his department's coffin. Terrence stepped forward, authority undeniable. "Chief Morrison, let's address the financial consequences." Morrison's face paled. "Federal funding was their lifeline. Equipment, training, half their budget. Brookhaven PD gets $2.3 million in federal grants yearly," Terrence read from his tablet. "Civil rights violations can trigger funding suspension under Section 14141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act." "Section 141," Rodriguez whispered. Mills knew the meaning. Federal oversight. They can take over everything. Terrence scrolled through figures. Community policing grants, $412,000. Drug enforcement, $638,000. Equipment modernization, $815,000. Training, $327,000. Each number meant jobs, salaries, survival. Without that money, Brookhaven PD would collapse in 90 days. Additionally, Jensen added, civil liability from today's incident alone could reach 7 figures. Morrison's voice shook. 7 figures? Federal civil rights suits under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 start at $1 million, Carter explained. Agent Washington's case will be prosecuted directly by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. The crowd outside kept swelling. More news vans arrived: CNN, MSNBC, Fox. The hashtag Brookhaven FBI was trending nationally. Dana Williams interviewed neighbors live. Mrs. Carter had become an instant sensation, her stream rebroadcast nationwide. But inside the unit, the real power play was underway. Jensen's tone shifted, edged with negotiation. There is an alternative path. Morrison leaned forward quickly. Any alternative to a federal takeover was worth hearing. Consent decree, Jensen said. Voluntary compliance with oversight and reforms. What would that involve? Terrence consulted his tablet. Restructured training. Mandatory bias training, 40 hours yearly, not 8 hours every 3 years. Each requirement chipped away at their control. Body cam footage reviewed by federal monitors, Carter added. Random sampling of 20% of all encounters focused on traffic and residential calls. External review board with community members, Jensen continued. Monthly compliance reports to the Justice Department. Zero tolerance. Zero tolerance policy for verified discrimination complaints. Rodriguez calculated quickly in his head. Zero tolerance meant any substantiated complaint could end a career instantly. The old boys club culture would collapse overnight. What specifically happens to Officer Sullivan? Morrison asked quietly. Jensen looked toward the patrol car where Sullivan sat. His career was effectively finished. Officer Sullivan will serve as a case study. His actions today will be analyzed in federal training materials distributed nationwide. The irony was sharp and merciless. Sullivan's racist assumptions would now educate thousands of officers about the consequences of bias. He can remain employed pending completion of 200 hours of bias training and community service, Jensen added. Terrence spoke firmly. In black and brown neighborhoods specifically. Sullivan would spend the next year serving the very communities he had discriminated against. The punishment fit the crime with poetic precision. The alternative to voluntary compliance, Jensen continued, is federal takeover under Title VI violations, complete loss of local control, federal management of all operations. Morrison had seen federal takeovers in other cities. Those departments became shells of themselves, micromanaged by Washington bureaucrats who had never walked a beat. Financial penalties would include full reimbursement of Operation Mirror costs, Terrence added, checking his tablet. Approximately $4.7 million over 18 months of investigation. Morrison's knees nearly buckled. $4.7 million would bankrupt the entire city government. Plus, Jensen added almost casually, criminal referrals for any officers found to have violated federal civil rights statutes under color of authority. Criminal referrals meant prison time. Sullivan could face federal charges for unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The livestream audience had reached 89,000 viewers. Comments flooded in from across the country. This is how you handle racist cops. FBI doesn't play with civil rights. Justice happening live. Blacktail stories give me hope. Real stories show change is possible, but anonymous accounts pushed back aggressively. Government overreach destroying good cops. What happened to due process? FBI targeting hardworking police. Morrison looked at his officers scattered around the scene. Rodriguez sweating heavily, Mills barely holding back tears, Sullivan broken and defeated in his patrol car. 28 years of building this department, and it was crumbling live on national television. If we accept the consent decree, Morrison asked slowly, what timeline are we looking at for implementation? Implementation begins immediately, Jensen replied firmly. Agent Washington will establish a permanent field office here within 30 days. Terrence smiled slightly, the first hint of satisfaction he'd allowed himself. I'll be your new neighbor permanently, Chief, living right here in Brookhaven, overseeing daily compliance operations. The final twist of the knife. The man Sullivan had tried to remove from the neighborhood would now run it with federal authority. Federal monitors will conduct quarterly reviews for 5 years minimum, Jensen continued. Extensions possible if compliance standards falter. 5 years of federal oversight. Every arrest, every complaint, every interaction scrutinized by Washington bureaucrats. Morrison looked at the cameras, the crowd, the federal agents surrounding his command. His department's failures were exposed on national television. The choice wasn't truly a choice. It was surrender or complete destruction. "Chief," Rodriguez whispered urgently, "we have to take the deal. We can't survive a federal takeover." Morrison nodded slowly, swallowing his pride. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "We accept the consent decree." Jensen smiled, the first genuine satisfaction she had shown all day. "Excellent decision. Agent Washington will begin transition planning immediately." She gestured to one of her agents, who stepped forward with legal documents already prepared. The FBI had known how this would end before it began. "Sign here for voluntary compliance. Initial here for federal oversight acceptance. Date here." Each signature felt like surrendering a piece of his department's soul, but Morrison signed anyway. The alternative was total destruction. The crowd applauded as news spread that the police department had accepted federal oversight. Mrs. Carter's comment section erupted with celebration. Justice served. This is accountability. Black stories finally getting the endings they deserve. But the real work was only beginning. Immediate accountability. Agent Carter stepped forward with additional paperwork. "Officer Sullivan, you're suspended without pay, pending completion of mandatory training." Sullivan looked up from his patrol car, defeat etched on his face. "For how long?" 6 months minimum, Jensen replied. 200 hours of bias training, 100 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. The specificity was deliberate. Sullivan would spend his suspension working in the very communities he had targeted. Officer Mills' formal reprimand, 40 hours of additional training within 90 days. Mills nodded silently, grateful it wasn't worse. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you'll attend federal leadership training on bias recognition and intervention protocols." Rodriguez had failed to stop Sullivan's escalation. His silence made him complicit. Karen Mitchell tried to slip away unnoticed, but Jensen's voice froze her in place. "Ms. Mitchell, HOA coordinator, your statement that Agent Washington didn't belong in this neighborhood is now part of the federal record." Karen's face went pale. I was mistaken. You were discriminatory. The HOA board will receive federal guidance on fair housing compliance." Even the neighborhood association wasn't immune from federal oversight. Systemic change was beginning. Terrence pulled out his tablet, reading from prepared reform protocols. Brookhaven PD would implement the Washington model for bias-free policing. The Washington model, named after him, would become the national template. All officers would complete 40-hour bias training annually, not the previous 8 hours every 3 years. Morrison winced. 40 hours meant taking officers off the street for a full work week every year. Body cameras would auto-upload to federal servers. Random sampling of 20% of all interactions with AI analysis for bias indicators. Technology would be their new supervisor. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every interaction monitored by federal algorithms. An external oversight board established with 7 community representatives. Monthly public meetings, quarterly compliance reviews. For the first time, the community would have real power over police operations. Agent Carter added the financial details. Federal funding restored contingent on monthly compliance reports. First violation triggers immediate review. The carrot and stick approach. Comply or lose everything. Legal and financial ramifications followed. Civil liability insurance increased to $5 million annually. Jensen continued. Previous incidents under review for possible federal prosecution. Morrison's stomach sank. $5 million in insurance would strain the city budget heavily. Officer Sullivan faced potential federal charges under 18 U.S.C. 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Sullivan's hands shook. Federal civil rights charges carried up to 10 years in prison, but cooperation with reform efforts could influence prosecutorial discretion. A lifeline. Comply fully and maybe avoid federal prison. Community healing initiatives. Mrs. Carter approached the federal command unit, still live streaming. Agent Washington, what happens next for the community? Terrence smiled, the first truly warm expression he had shown all day. Mrs. Carter, you're now part of the oversight board. Your documentation made this accountability possible. The crowd cheered. Mrs. Carter had become a civil rights hero with just her phone camera. Monthly town halls between police and residents, restorative justice programs for past incidents, community policing partnerships, real change, not just punishment. Jensen addressed the growing crowd. Federal mediators would facilitate healing sessions between affected community members and officers. Personal victory and intellectual triumph. Terence checked his watch, the same omega that had marked the countdown to this moment. 11:47 a.m. Less than 2 hours had changed everything. No violence, no lawsuits immediately required, no revenge. Change achieved through documentation, federal leverage, and strategic patience. This model will be replicated in 46 other cities currently under federal investigation, Terence announced for the cameras. Sullivan finally spoke from his patrol car. "Agent Washington, how long have you been planning this?" Terence walked forward slowly. "Officer Sullivan, I've been documenting bias for 18 months. But you chose your actions today." The distinction mattered. Terence created the opportunity for justice. Sullivan created the injustice. "I could have responded with anger, with violence, with lawsuits. Instead, I responded with evidence." The crowd listened closely, phones still recording. Real change happens when we stay calm enough to be strategic. Broader impact. Dana Williams raised her microphone. "Agent Washington, what message does this send nationally?" "Those touching stories of injustice don't have to end in despair," Terence replied. "Life stories can have different outcomes when we document everything and use the system correctly." Mrs. Carter wiped away tears. Her decision to record had triggered a federal civil rights investigation. Jensen stepped forward with the final announcement. The Brookhaven model would be presented to Congress next month as proposed legislation for nationwide police reform. Sullivan's racist assumptions had accidentally created the catalyst for national change. Morrison pocketed his copy of the consent decree, knowing his department would never be the same. But watching Terence shake hands with community leaders, he realized transformation might not be such a terrible thing. The black stories that happened every day in America finally had an example of systemic justice. 6 months later, the Brookhaven Federal Field Office occupied the corner building on Maple Drive, just 3 blocks from where Officer Sullivan had handcuffed Agent Washington. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Terence walked through his new neighborhood each morning, greeting the same neighbors who had witnessed his humiliation. Mrs. Carter always waved from her window, still proud of her role in changing everything. The numbers told the story of transformation. Racial profiling incidents in Brookhaven down 78%. Officer complaints involving bias down 84%. Community trust surveys up 63%. Officer Sullivan had completed his bias training and community service. The man who once saw threats in black faces now coached youth basketball in East Brookhaven. His transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. "Agent Washington changed my life," Sullivan admitted in his first public interview. "I was raised with hate, but I don't have to live with it." Personal transformation and legacy. Terence's promotion to assistant director of the newly created National Bias Prevention Unit came with a mandate: replicate Brookhaven nationwide. His marriage to Dr. Kesha Washington, a community activist and researcher, strengthened his resolve. Together they embodied the intellectual path to social change: data over drama, strategy over protest. The Washington Protocol was now studied in police academies across 43 states. His book, Staying Calm in the Storm, an FBI agent's guide to systemic change, became required reading for law enforcement leaders. Broader social impact. Mrs. Carter's live stream had sparked a movement. Our Document Everything became a rallying cry for civil rights advocates. Her video, now reaching 12 million views, proved that ordinary citizens with smartphones could trigger federal investigations. The Brookhaven model had already been implemented in 27 cities. Crime rates stayed steady while bias complaints dropped sharply. The evidence showed that fair policing was effective policing. Karen Mitchell had resigned from the HOA board and relocated to Florida. For the first time, community leadership reflected Brookhaven's true diversity. National legislative impact followed. Congress passed the Federal Police Accountability Act, directly inspired by Operation Mirror. The law mandated bias training, federal oversight triggers, and community seats in police governance. Senator Maria Rodriguez cited Terrence's testimony. Agent Washington proved we can achieve justice through documentation and determination, not destruction and division. The power of preparation over confrontation. Standing in his federal office, Terrence thought back to that morning 6 months earlier. His measured response to Sullivan's racism had launched the largest police reform movement in decades. The principle echoed in every speech he delivered. True power comes from preparation, not confrontation. Systemic change required documentation, allies, and strategic patience. He had preserved his dignity while achieving collective progress, just as his father taught him. Personal growth and continued mission. The young black agents working under Terrence saw him as proof that the system could serve justice, not just control. His calm leadership inspired a new generation of federal investigators dedicated to civil rights. Each case they handled added to the expanding record of real stories that proved change was possible. Call to action. Your story matters, Terrence said, looking into the camera during his final interview. Every injustice you witness, every bias you document, every moment you choose courage over comfort, it all adds up. He thought of Mrs. Carter with her phone, the neighbors who spoke up, the federal agents who acted. Share your experiences with bias in the comments below. Your Blacktail stories could be the evidence someone needs for justice. Subscribe to Blacktail Stories for more accounts of quiet courage and systemic change. Because touching stories don't have to end with tears. They can end with transformation. Visit our website for resources on Know Your Rights training and bias reporting. Together we can document our way to equality. And remember, when you see injustice, don't just get angry. Get evidence. The screen faded to black with one last message. Blacktail Stories, where real-life stories create real change.